Cthun, the first ever old god we deal with in-game, and the second old god to be covered in the Villains Corner. Cthun holds the distinction of being one of the few villains confirmed to have been killed by players in-game, or, as we're known in lore, a band of adventurers.
You are already dead.
Cthun Story starts off the same as all the other old gods. Cthun is merely a fragment of the Void Lord sent to random planets in hopes of corrupting a Titan's soul by mere chance. Cthun and his other buddy old gods managed to get lucky and find a planet with a world soul, and went about conquering it and started corrupting the hell out of it. Some things happened, and the Titans found out about the planet, and waged a war on the old gods for control of the planet of Azeroth. In the battle, one of the old gods was killed, and the other old gods were imprisoned, once they found out that killing the other old gods would also destroy the planet anyway. So, lore-wise, you can't actually kill the old gods without also killing the planet itself. And this is merely the prelude to Cthun Story. Now, before I go on to the next stage of Cthun Story, I must first give a little backstory on the Ahn'Qiraj.
Your heart will explode.
During a battle with some of the Titan Keepers, one of Yogg-Saron's top minions, known as the Cthraxi, was beaten nearly to death, but managed to run away and try to recover. Centuries later, a few trolls managed to find its hiding spot and woke it up, and as thanks, he killed all the trolls in the area, and discovered a vast troll empire had sprung up in the time that he had been asleep. So, in order to spite them, because he was just a huge dick and thought the old gods would like it, he sent out a psychic signal to all of the submerged Ahn'Qiraj, who had been hiding since the end of the War of the Titans, and formed them into an army to wipe out the troll empires. This attack on the trolls is what finally united the separated tribes, and turned into a centuries-long war in which the Cthraxi was eventually killed, and the Ahn'Qiraj were then hunted into extinction. So the Ahn'Qiraj that did manage to survive hid in 3 corners of the world, and the Ahn'Qiraj that decided to hide in Silithus were eventually morphed into the Qiraji by Cthun, and became the center force of Cthulhu's army, which then leads into the War of the Shifting Sands. Many thousands of years later, some night elves thought it would be a neat idea to try to turn the desert of Silithus into a lush green forest. So they sent out a scouting party to survey the land, led by Volstan Staghelm, and kinda accidentally awoke the Qiraji who had been sleeping, with Cthun also giving them a bigger push and sending them all into a murderous rampage. The Night Elves, realizing what kind of threat they could pose, immediately set out to try and contain the Qiraji to the deserts before they could spread out across the continent, with Fandral Staghelm in charge of the operation. But the Night Elf army was no match for the near unlimited amount of bugs pouring out of Silithus. So Fandral went to ask the nearby Bronze Dragons for help to contain the threat, but the Bronze Dragons declined help and just kinda told the Night Elves to handle it themselves. Then, during a battle, a band of Qiraji managed to surround a base held up by Volstan Staghelm and took him prisoner. They then brought him in front of the Night Elf army, including his dad, Fandral Staghelm, and tore him to pieces. Seeing his son killed in front of him completely destroyed his will to fight, and the Qiraji managed to push back the elves and flood into neighboring zones, including Tanaris. Once the Qiraji attacked the Caverns of Time, the Bronze Dragons finally took them as a real threat and joined the Night Elves' fight, and even got the aid of 3 of the other dragonflights as well. And with the combined might of the entire Night Elf army and 4 of the dragon aspects in their flights, they only managed to push them back to Silithus, and were still having a hard time with them. For as one of the Bronze Dragons said, for every 50 of the insects that were annihilated by his breath, 100 would be waiting to take their place. So instead of trying to eliminate them completely, they instead sought to try and contain them inside the city of AhnQiraj. So with one last major push, and with all of the druids working together on one spell, and with the help of the Bronze Dragons, they managed to summon a giant barrier around the city and close it off from the outside world. All the Qiraji that were outside the barrier were then quickly dealt with, and the bronze dragon AhnQiraj created the Scarab Gong and the Scepter of the Shifting Sands, which would allow them to reopen the city should they ever need to in the future to go in and deal with the problem of the Qiraji more permanently. The bronze dragon then gave the scepter to Fandral, who immediately destroyed it, shattering it into pieces because he was mad at the bronze dragons for not helping out earlier, before his son was killed. Fandral would then go on to be involved in the resurrection of the Emerald Nightmare, and then become the second to last boss in the Cataclysm Firelands raid, when he threw in his lot with Ragnaros. All because he kinda went crazy after watching his son die. And that was the end of the threat of Cthulhu for about 1,000 years, before the second War of the Shifting Sands took place within Vanilla WoW's timeline. You see, some of the Qiraji had found out how to get outside the barrier and were causing havoc in Kalimdor. AhnQiraj, the bronze dragon, then decided it was time to finally, more permanently deal with the Qiraji threat, and asked heroes of both the Alliance and Horde to reopen the gate. So, with the combined forces of the Alliance and Horde, in a rare instance of them working directly together, created a force called the Might of Kalimdor, with Varrock Sourfang at the lead position of Supreme Commander, and opened the gates and went inside the city to deal with Cthulhu directly. And according to lore, it was thanks to a band of heroes that Cthulhu was finally defeated, and the Qiraji finally calmed down a bit, as they're generally only really aggressive when an old god is sending them into a frenzy. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is one of the few times in game where a villain is defeated and credit is given to the players in game. Now, despite the fact that it said Cthulhu was killed during the events of the second War of the Shifting Sands, it's heavily speculated whether or not Cthulhu actually died or not. Sure, he might be, quotation marks, dead, but is he dead? His lore after this point is a little murky, and probably won't be cleared up until the third Chronicle book comes out. So, as it stands now, Cthulhu is defeated, that much is sure, and Cho'Gall attempted to resurrect him, only in-game, he doesn't do a very good job and is eventually killed on the other side of the world in the Bastion of Twilight. And in the comics, he's a little bit more successful, but I wouldn't count the comics as canon since they tend to disregard a lot that happens in them. Not everything, mind you, they absolutely bring in some lore from the comics randomly, like how they brought in Meryl, Fellstorm, and Legion with the Mage Order Hall, and a few other things. But as it stands now, I think we just defeated a portion of Cthulhu, and more readily contained him in his prison, and his prison might have been weakened a little bit after the whole Sargeras sword stabbing incident. For you see, after the events of the Legion expansion, Sargeras stabs his giant sword into the heart of Silithus before being imprisoned by the Titans. At this point in time, as of making this video, we don't really know what this means. But seeing as it happened so close to Cthulhu's prison, and the murky nature behind what Blizzard plans to do with Cthun Story, as they have neither closed it off completely, nor expanded on it much, Cthulhu might have a role to play later on in WoW Story. So, I think this is a good place to end this video for now.
You will die.
Alright, and that's the end of the Villains Corner segment on Cthulhu. Do you have any suggestions for which villain I should make a video on next? Suggest it down in the comments. What I'll most likely do is take the most requested villains, and then maybe narrow them down into a few, and then have my Patreons vote on which one of those will be made next. And also, big thanks to Rachel for doing all the drawings for the video. Link to her DeviantArt page and webpage will be in the video description.
You are weak.